Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Joining me today on this roundtable are my excellent friends from Network Music. So I welcome Terry McBride, CEO, Chris Norwood, Head of Strategy, Karen Meeks, Director of People Operations, and Colleen Novak, Artist Manager. The podcast we will discuss is called Healing the Problem Under the Problem, in which I had a wonderful conversation with Garrett Wood. Garrett is a national board certified health and wellness coach, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and an executive functions specialist. He's based in California and he runs Gnosis Therapy. And he specialises in helping high achieving, high masking professionals break free from burnout, chronic stress, and imposter syndrome, helping them build sustainable success without sacrificing health, happiness, or relationships. So Garrett reached out to me after he listened to one of my podcasts on personality and developing character. I checked out his website, read the excellent case studies there, and I knew straight away we had a lot to talk about. Because I've coached and counselled many high-performing people who are suffering from burnout, perfectionism, and the imposter syndrome, I was very drawn to Garrett's approach. Many of these people have experienced ineffective standard treatments and strategies, and I knew that the real problems they had were deeper, more implicit. Generally, the symptoms were being treated, not the real problem. So in the podcast, we started with Garrett's background and what led to his passion for working with burnout and high performers. Sadly, as is often the case, a tragic suicide of a very high-performing colleague was the catalyst for the wonderful work he now does. So we explored the relationship between high performance and burnout, how one can recognise burnout in oneself, especially as it manifests in the mind, the emotions, and one's body. We then discussed the shortcomings of traditional approaches and finally explored, in broad terms, Garrett's approach that starts with body regulation, then relating with compassion to one's painful feelings and thoughts that are masked by apparent thriving and resilience, and only then using reason to restructure more adaptive, healthy understandings of self. It was an invigorating conversation, hopefully one of a series that will dive deeper into the nuts and bolts of helping people find a more balanced, calmer orientation to sustained high performance. But now to my excellent friends from Network Music. Here they are. Hello, my friends. Lovely to see you. A longer podcast because there was a lot to talk about. So let's jump into it. Who wants to be first cab off the rank?
Aaron.
Well, my first instinct was, can I just sit back and soak in the takeaways from these three cognitive athletes? Because I think what they have to say is going to be fascinating. High achievers amongst the ranks here. I think what really resonated with me was just the title of the podcast, The Problem Under the Problem. And then for where I sit in my job in the organization, how it relates to performance management. So burnout, how it relates to performance management, and where high achievers, when they get to that point of burnout, they can enter into low performance, right? So dealing with situations where like, okay, so how do we, as managing these folks, how do we approach that? Like, you didn't dive into, I'd be curious about your thoughts, like where there could be undiagnosed neurodivergence, or you're dealing with somebody who is neurodivergent. So how the best way to approach that as a manager from a performance management perspective.
Hooly dooly. Oh. So there's quite a lot there. There's like 3 or 4 things there, really. And no, that's okay.
Just the last thing, exactly what you said last. That's the zinger.
Yeah. So, but let's just start where see if we can keep it in the same order. So very often the first time that you might know that a high performer is struggling with either an underlying mental health concern or indeed burnout is when their performance drops, right? Or commonly, it may not be their performance; it might be their behaviour. Right, so they might where they're normally, pretty calm, friendly, agreeable types, and they start snapping at people, right?
I'm a toxic high performer.
Yeah, and but it's definitely a warning sign when you have a high performer and their performance drops, and on the surface, nothing seems to have changed, right? And it's a delicate situation for managers and human resource people in that you wear two hats, as it were. One hat is that you're managing a person's performance. They're under contract to perform a role, and there are inherent requirements for the role. But you also have a hat, a sort of duty of care hat. And they're both important duties. And when you start to notice a person, now let's say this person is masking, but their performance has dropped, that should alert the mind to, well, actually, one possibility here is that there's something underlying this, that it's unlike them. I wonder if there's something going wrong at home, or there's an illness, or there's a mental health concern. So you sort of take off the performance hat temporarily, put on the duty of care hat, and start to inquire, is everything okay? Right? And so I think that's the first step for managers, is to realise they've got these two duties. When something just doesn't feel right, especially when the person is a high performer, nothing seems to have changed, but performance has dropped, that should be a warning sign. And it often, for example, might represent that a person is depressed, or they have an anxiety condition, or their marriage is in trouble, or they're not sleeping. It can be a whole range of things. The job there, of course, is to create a sense of psychological safety for them, to say, we're going to do everything we can to support you if there's anything there. And of course, down the track, you have a number of conversations, and once you're putting, helping them get the help they need, you return to, if it's performance management, you return to the performance conversation. And the reason is that for most people, being successful at work is good for their mental and physical health, right? So you might remember in the early days when we started really, probably 15, 20 years ago, started talking about mental health in the workplace. The primary intervention was go home, rest. And often people never made it back, right? Because their self-esteem would plummet because coming back to work was a bridge too far. It started to become scary and insurmountable. Right, now, the neurodivergence part. Obviously, as they say, we live in interesting times, and I've never seen so much discussion of neurodivergence. And obviously, there's a lot more diagnosis going on of adult ADHD, sometimes including ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and so people are quite alert to it. And obviously, you are, and so we're kind of looking for it. And not only that, people themselves are looking for it. Right, so there's a lot of self-diagnosis going on. Heard of someone the other day whose son has got ADHD, and they started taking some of their medication, just on and off, just taking some. Anyway, it's how to manage it. Actually, I'm looking forward to having further conversations with Garrett, because one of his specialities is working with people with ADHD who are very high performers, and So I think he has specific expertise. But what I do understand about it is the world can be quite overwhelming for people with ADHD from a stimulus point of view, and they're often easily overwhelmed by too much happening around them, and they actually need training on how to sort of get more into focus. They're an unusual case because they either have this hyper focus or completely scattered focus, right? And when it's really, and they procrastinate a lot because the next task appears like a brick wall to them. It's just like completely forbidding, and so plus their attention's easily diverted all over the place. So I think there has to be very practical discussions about how to mediate the space around them when they're working, but I also think they need therapeutic assistance to train in some methodologies to calm down their nervous system, to quieten it down somewhat, and that may include medication, but also I think some of the more body-based strategies, somatic therapies, hypnotherapy, self-compassion-based therapies. There's a whole kit bag of them, and some of them are purely physical, breathing, of course, meditation. But meditation is very difficult for people with ADHD. And so, but I think that there are ways of practicing mindfulness that don't mean you've got to sit on a pillow. But I struggle with how to work with these people, so my heart goes out to you. So I think it's a problem-solving conversation, and if it can be very open, that when we get to people, we get people to the sorts of help with people who specialise in it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the further conversations, because that's exactly it. Being supportive and empathetic and helping these people, setting them up to succeed in the best way we can, while also navigating the needs of the business to make sure that the needs of the business are met. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, and there could be your duty of care might extend to people around that person if they're acting out, because they're just frazzled, it's a really interesting phenomenon at the moment. I'm not sure where I sit on whether it's being overdiagnosed or not. I really don't know, but that's a possibility. Things. There's often the flavour of the month with respect to mental health. I think this is the flavour of the month, but I don't know. I'm not qualified. All right, fantastic. Thank you for that. As we say, curly question. Who might be next?
Oh, I can go next. So I was fascinated by the biased emotion upon cognitive thought, but that you react to it emotionally before you really think about it.
Yeah.
I found that utterly fascinating. And also, if a belief is attached to an emotion and it's strong enough, it can override reality.
Yeah.
Which I found utterly fascinating. And the self-diagnosis is rampant. I'm quite sure there's AI prompts out there that do it for you. Yeah, a really interesting time. But those two things I found utterly fascinating.
Okay, so let's talk about the relationship between reasoning and emotion. So in psychology, we have a concept, I think, called emotional reasoning, which is what you were describing. It's basically this idea that if we have a belief and it's attached to a very strong emotion, we're much more likely to consider that belief is truth, is true, right? And the stronger the belief, the more likely are we to think that something's true. So, for example, in the political polarization in pretty much around the world, particularly in North America, people are often holding beliefs that really don't hold water. They're pretty patently untrue, but they're attached to intense emotions, and also group membership, right? Which again brings very powerful positive emotions, right? And so it can be very, very difficult to change a person's view when there is a very powerful emotion attached to it, right? So that creates a deep investment. And generally speaking, if you try to argue people out of it, you get this sort of blowback. They double down on the belief. They actually become more entrenched, which is a bit annoying for the person who's trying to dissuade them. The other thing, though, is a more general point about the way the sort of architecture of humans, and that is that we process the world emotionally before we process it consciously in terms of reason. So everything that gets to those frontal lobes, as it were, particularly in the left hemisphere, it's being sort of delivered. It's freighting in these kind of emotional themes. So everything we get to cognize about has already got this emotional load and biasing. And the same thing applies to the conversations we've been having recently about personality. Because personality is basically a preference system. It's a feeling-based system about what I like and don't like, what's good, what's bad, the egocentric bias. So a huge amount, if not like the large majority of our thinking is implicitly and biased by these powerful emotional undercurrents. So this is absolutely central to my conversation with Garrett, because it's very implicit, these thoughts like I'm not good enough, or I'm a phony, or I'm I'm bad because I'm struggling and I mustn't let anyone see. These they don't hold up to scrutiny when you look at the objective facts with people. They're often very high performers. They're nice people. People are fond of them. All that sort of stuff. But their feeling about themselves trumps the reality contact. And this is why I'm fascinated by a kind of reversal or switching the polarity in Garrett's treatment. See, in like standard cognitive behavioural therapy, you start with reason. So you say, let's find the thoughts that are unrealistic or not very constructive. Let's rework them to something more reasonable and constructive. And then you watch as the emotions change, and then the body state changes. Right? Now, of course, that works a lot of the time, except when it doesn't. And this is the space where Garrett specialises. If the body is in a parlous state, you've got stress hormones and you're burning out, and you're depleting your resources, you're not sleeping, we can't do the reasoning part, right? And that's that's the thing. So back to Karen's question, the person performance might be dropping because they've got to the point now where they can't think straight, they can't concentrate, they can't problem solve, the very things that they're highly capable of. And so you can't then say, look, you've got to think more rationally. Because these people are already saying about themselves, I know it's nonsense, but I can't help it. The feeling is much stronger than the reasonable thought. So you start by regulating the body, and that opens up a calmer, more compassionate acceptance of what's there, because mostly they're compressing this stuff. They're just keeping it out of sight and not wanting to experience it. And then that opens up access to the frontal lobes to start to construct a more felt sense, but also aligned with one's reason. So you're moving the person from being misaligned from how they're feeling to what they kind of know, but they can't access at a feeling level, right? So it's quite a nuanced space, this. But personally, I think it's got a lot more relevance than just the space of burnout and perfectionism and so on. I think it's got a universal relevance to the way that, in less dramatic ways, we don't relax enough and we don't enjoy our life enough and we're worried all the time and it's this underlying doubts about ourselves, etc., etc. Just less dramatic, but you scratch most people, you find it. Yeah. That leaves you two, Chris and Colleen, the two C's. You're going to go, Colleen? Okay.
Sure. I think just to add to what you just said, I think it's really challenging what you do because you don't want to dampen emotions. You don't want to, and medications fall into this. It's important for people to feel and not just some of the emotions, because we learn from that. We learn, good behavior, bad behavior, or whatever feelings.
Yeah.
So everybody's, I guess, you have to, in your profession, have to find what that individual needs.
Yeah, so good. So I think there's like a big divide in my field, really, both in psychiatry and in psychology, between those who basically just want to focus on symptoms, and medicate the symptoms, so. And of course, we should do that. It's like if someone's got a really bad headache, you give them what do you call it? Tylenol, in your part of the word, paracetamol. But if you're getting lots of headaches, then the question has to be asked: what's causing these headaches? And that's the problem under the problem, right? So, as you say, you learn a lot from emotions. So, from an evolutionary psychology point of view, why would the whole species be riddled with all of these emotions? And there's so many of them, and some are really positive and some are negative. Like, why aren't we just like calculating machines? And the answer is that our emotions are very informative. They move us towards things that hopefully will engender well-being and passing on genes on to the next generation or whatever, and they move us away from things that are aversive. And so negative emotions, generally speaking, are informative if we pay attention to them. Where we get in trouble is when we suppress them, repress them, pretend they're not there. So then we get this misalignment problem, this non-attunement to the body. So the other interesting piece here is that people then start to become relatively disembodied. They actually lose touch with how they're feeling. They're so accustomed to suppressing. But because, it's inevitable in the end that the body will exact a price. And now we're back to Karen and people who are normally high performers, and now that they just can't maintain it. So, emotional intelligence, again, it's a common phrase these days, but part of it is valuing and recognizing what emotions are there and what they've got to tell me. So that, and interesting, when you do that, the heat drops out of the emotions, and we can access more our reasoning to think about, well, what should I do about it? And I'm working with a guy at the moment who's like massive practice. He's a lawyer, and he's got some major issues, and he's recognised he needs to at least halve the size of his practice. right? And but he couldn't get to that point until he really understood and accepted that the pain he's experiencing is not worth the egoic rewards of having, the biggest practice in the firm, that sort of thing, right? So, but it for a long time there was no way he could access that thought, because that thought was just threatening, because all this success and status and achievement was the payoff for all this pain and suffering.
Right. And the other part of that, I mean, I think there's the burnout element to that, but the other part that is really difficult is it becomes their whole identity.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I mean, we're starting to hear more of that in the political climate, and just how politicians won't go away. But that's who they are, and that's their identity, and that's crushing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very interesting thing, and no doubt. Well, I'll talk to Garrett again, but maybe you've got me thinking here. Probably should talk a bit about, maybe in a podcast, about identity and the ego and what the hell is going on. Because again, it's a universal problem. It's just the differences in degree, right? We all have identity issues, if I put it that way. Beautiful. And Christopher.
So this triggered a bit of a introspection around burnout.
Yeah.
This podcast. And I've had moments of burnout in my past that come and go, and I'm not just saying this because we have an HR leader and our CEO on this call, but I will say that every single one of those instances were self-imposed, not the expectations that the company was putting on me.
Yes.
Right. Which is interesting, right? It's more, I need to do all of these things, right? It was very from a sense of self, not me trying to live up to what was expected of me externally. Yeah. And that's helpful also, because it's a reminder that, like, oh, well, I've also got the power in me to kind of turn this burn off, so to speak. It's never that easy, but yeah, I think you understand what I'm saying. But
yeah,
and so what this got me thinking about a little bit, though, is I have a team of people that I manage and I oversee, and I certainly don't hold, I don't expect any of them to be working themselves to the point of burnout, right? And tell them as much as I can, right? But at the same time, the people who do that tend to put out a lot of good, high quality work, and then can get rewarded because they're doing all of this extra good. So is there a risk, and like, I'm even stepping out of network, but just in the world at large, that like we're indirectly rewarding burnout behavior by giving people that do put out a great quality work, high volume work. Maybe they're just burning both ends of the candle, and it's sacrificing their well-being. But on the other side, we're giving them the rewards that are feeding into it.
Yeah, I think
how do we manage that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like, but you're right. The system, as it were, generally speaking, is set up to reward this kind of unhealthy, more obsessive kind of working, right? And the esteem rewards of it are delightful. Like, that's the problem. It's like they don't last, but when we get them, they're just like manna from heaven, right? Mm-hmm. And now, if what's sitting underneath that is a kind of punitive sort of attitude to self, as it were, like some sort of perfectionism or imposter syndrome, but this idea that I know other people aren't expecting, but I expect it of me, and if I don't produce it, I'm going to really drop down in my own estimation, and then people will actually discover that I'm not as great as I appear to be. So they're in this terrible bind.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, if the system then rewards when they go above and beyond continuously, and it'd be weird to have a system that doesn't reward that.
Right. That would be nonsense also on the other side,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. So, but I think having conversations with people when you sniff out,
yeah.
and especially given your own experience, like you can say, just got a bit of an inkling here that you might be as mad as me. No, don't say that. Okay, don't say that. But I think you know what I'm getting at. Like, there's a and have it could be a really enlivening conversation for people to actually explore this, because most of the people that Garrett works with have got a pretty good sense of the trap they're in.
Yeah.
But they just don't know how to find a way out of it. Right. And so a conversation like that might be the starting point for someone to actually do some of the inner inquiry, which is about some of the drivers of this very deep felt sense, this felt need to sacrifice one's well-being for external success.
Yeah.
Right? And then if they can get, just some work around that with someone else, not you, no offense, then, they'd be eternally grateful to you, because it would take so much pressure off. And after all, Garrett's work is about enabling people to still be really, really successful.
Right.
But not to have this sort of added burden all the time, this anxiety and this worry and dread and fear and feeling unsafe.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
a kind of category mistake. I can't remember I'm not sure if I talked to him about this, what I call the grand delusion. Does that ring a bell? No. So what I mean by that is that it's like a universal delusion that we all have that basically at some level we're not good enough. Which, if you think about it, is a bit insane, right? Like, it can't be the case that the whole human race is not good enough, in some sense. And I know we might say we're all flawed creatures, et cetera, but it's different. It's a kind of valuation of self. Now, we wouldn't say that about a baby. Like, if you're cradling a newborn, you're going to say it's perfect. Like, you're not going to try to improve it, and withhold your love until it, recites French poetry. But somewhere along the line, that kid, and maybe even the parents, shift to this complete valuation of their being, and we shift it to saying, well, you get love for your doing, right? So I think we've got to find our way back to this sort of felt sense that I am valuable as a human being as I am, and therefore what I do is done out of interest and passion and curiosity, not out of this need, this remedial need to make myself valuable to the village so that I'll be safe and I can relax and actually enjoy my life. So these are like big questions, and food for thought for future podcasts, I suspect. Yeah. My friends, excellent friends, as I think I said in the introduction, and you are excellent friends. Wonderful, just insightful questions, and very thoughtful. And I'll see if I can have some more conversations with Garrett, and we'll sprinkle those across the podcast. I think you and the audience will find that very helpful. So take care of yourselves. Don't work too hard. Don't obsess. Don't strive beyond well-being. And I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too.